You're listening to The Russell Scott Show.
Brien Foerster, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
Brien is the author of 12 books. He's also an anthropologist. His latest book is The Enigma of Cranial Deformation. Brien, how long have you been studying cranial deformation or the elongated skulls?
Well, it basically started when I first came to Peru about 6 years ago. I was in a small museum that had a display of these strange-shaped skulls, stating that they were Inca, but with no explanation as to who or what they were. And the more that I traveled through Peru, the more of these I would, come across in different museums. And then 4 years ago, I moved to a little town south of Lima called Paracas on the coast. And there I walked into a small museum that had one on display and found out from the museum director that he had a number of others in his house. So he brought them into the museum. And from there, we started to develop a collection of them. Presently, we have 38 of different shapes and sizes.
Is this common information in South America that these particular skulls exist? Because I'm assuming in North America, few people know this.
Well, that's true. The thing is that if anybody looks up photos on the internet, like through Google or Bing or whatever, and if you put in something like alien skull or alien hybrid skull, you always wind up almost automatically with a picture of one of the Paracas skulls because they are probably the largest humanoid skulls in the world. And Eric von Daniken, for example, as far as I know, used them as examples of who he thought ancient aliens were.
Do you feel that there's enough scientific basis for that?
That's actually what I'm working on. The purpose of the book that David Childress and I wrote was to look globally at this phenomenon of an ancient cultural practice called cranial deformation. We did find it all over the world, and the average time when this happened was about 2,000 years ago. So we started to develop connections between ancient cultures, but in terms of cranial deformation, most of the examples found around the world are obviously a cultural practice, but here in Peru, there seem to be examples of them which seem natural in form. They don't look like anybody tried to alter the shape. It looks like these people were born that way.
Okay, well, how would one actually have their skull elongated? Now, I'm 33. I'm thinking about having it done to myself.
Well, Russell, it would be very expensive and painful. The basic thing is that it's something which is done to a newborn child, and globally it was only done to nobility. And so because a child's skull, when they're a baby, is soft, it's malleable. And so what would commonly happen is that either cord or some kind of textile would be wrapped around the baby's skull, and then gently, over the course of about 2 years, the shape would be altered, usually into what would look like a cone head from Saturday Night Live. Not funny, but fascinating.
And I don't recommend this to anyone at home. Probably not a good idea.
No, please, folks, don't do this to your kids.
One of the most fascinating things about these skulls are that the cranial vault is increased. The average human skull is yay big, and with this elongation technique, you can actually increase the size of the cavity.
Well, that's one of the mysteries, and I've asked a number of doctors, because I've had numerous physicians here come to Peru and look at these, and most have said that you can't increase the cranial volume. You can change the shape. It's almost like if you took a pot which hadn't hardened yet from a potter's wheel. You can change the shape of it, but you can't increase the size. And so that's one of the mysteries, because some of them are significantly larger than the average human skull of that time.
How much is significantly?
Examples I've seen and have been able to test are 25 to 30% larger.
So my question then would be, if we use 10% of our brains, or 5% or whatever it may be, if our brains are that much bigger, do we have more to draw from? Does it make us smarter?
It's possible, because one thing is that wherever you find these skulls, you also find megalithic constructions, as in the very famous constructions that people have seen in photographs or in person near Cusco, of the buildings where there was no mortar or cement between the stone. That's also where we find these skulls. And also, because of the alteration in the shape, that means that the right and left hemispheres would probably be communicating with each other in a different way than how our brains work.
Very interesting, because if we look at ancient Egypt, and of course the mystery of the pyramids is well known, we have Akhenaten, we have King Tutankhamun, both with elongated skulls, purportedly.
Well, that's true. That's mainly in the art form, but that was a very interesting period in Egyptian history, because that was what's called the Amarna period, and that's when they moved away from having several gods to actually returning to worshiping one god. That whole family was most likely murdered by the ruling class priests, and so that's why we only have Tutankhamun as a concrete example of one of those skulls. The other ones have never been found.
And you say the elongated skulls, they've been found all over the world.
Yeah, they have. From Russia, they've been found in Russia, they've been found in Germany, they've been found in Africa, South America, Central America, Melanesia, theoretically in China and Japan, and other countries as well. So in the book that David Childers and I wrote, we tried to work out the relationship between these different cultures, because Melanesia is in the middle of the Pacific, and so you'd think, how could there be a connection between islands in the Pacific and anywhere else? And the thing is, you have to go to the oral traditions of the people, and what they say is that their ancestors came from Egypt. So there could be the ancient relationship between some kind of interesting humans that lived in Egypt at one time and these people in Melanesia. And as well, it's also the same in Congo, because up until the late 20th century, this practice was still being done. And it turns out that the ancestors of these people also came from Egypt and Sudan. So those connections are possible. What I'm working on right now is the relationship or the distribution of these in Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador.
But I think what people want to know is this proof of an ancient once one world society.
Well, it could be, because the thing is, there's more and more evidence that in deep history or deep prehistory, there seems to have been seafaring capability globally. Columbus was not the first person to jump in a boat and reach North America from Europe, for example.
Wait. That's what they teach in high school, is it not?
Well, it is, but of course now we know, even academics admit that the Vikings came before that, and there's growing evidence that that Africans visited the Americas, et cetera, et cetera. I've been studying many different cultures and their roots have a tendency to come from very distant places, and not the standard, typical academic story. For example, the Polynesians are a very mysterious people because they didn't simply come from Southeast Asia. There seem to be genetic traces between South America and Polynesia.
One of the more interesting theories in the book is the out of Africa theory, the theory being that all human life came from Africa. And as we see with the Olmecs, some of their artifacts have Negroid features.
Exactly.
Is this proof of what you call diffusionism?
I believe so. And also you see Asiatic features. And so it's quite probable that that area where the Olmec lived, which is a very narrow part of Central America, that could have been a place where people from both Asia and Africa, they used that point to cross between the Pacific and Atlantic, or Atlantic and Pacific, because it's so narrow. That's why in modern times we have the Panama Canal, because it's so narrow.
Is it possible to date these skulls? Is there any kind of testing that you can, eh?
Oh, definitely. Carbon-14 can be done. We dated 3 of the Paracas skulls at 2,350 years. So they're not that ancient in comparison, but I'm on the lookout for older and older samples. And, this for me is going to be a decades-long search. Samples have been sent to a major laboratory in the United States from both the Paracas area and also the Cusco area, and we have researchers, seasoned professionals, who are basically volunteering their time to find out, if possible, if they can actually isolate the entire genome of these samples. And if they're able to do that, then they will be able to tell us everything about these people. We're hoping to get results within 2 weeks, which at least as phase 1 will tell us whether or not they are completely Homo sapiens like us, or if they have segments of DNA which are not what we regard as human. So that's what we're looking for in phase 1. And then phase 2 will give us the mitochondrial evidence, and that will tell us where in the world the ancestry of these people came from. And we're hoping to have several phases of this.
Have they not proven with the mitochondrial Eve theory that all life came from Africa, and they can attribute this to an African woman?
That is quite probable.
Human life. I shouldn't say all life.
Yeah, well, they haven't, of course, tested every possible, culture on the planet yet. But that theory holds a lot of strength, and in that case, we are talking hundreds of thousands of years, whereas in this case, we're looking at probably somewhere in the region of 2,000 to 12,000 years of the existence of these people.
One of the most interesting parts of this book, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation, definitely my book of the month, is this issue of trepanning. This is the practice of boring a hole into the skull. We've found this throughout the world in different cultures, but yet it also exists with these elongated skulls.
Oh, very definitely. In a lot of cases, the elongated skulls had trepanning done to them, and quite a refined practice of surgery, brain surgery, at least 2,000 years ago.
But is there an abnormally large number of the elongated skulls that have had this surgery done?
Well, there's an abnormally high percentage of this practice in the Paracas and Cusco areas, as compared to the rest of the world, as far as I know. And the different beliefs as to why this was done, A is because of war injury, B is because people thought that maybe these people were possessed by demons, and by cutting a hole in the head, you'd release the spirit. But it's more probable that they were literally trying to manipulate the way the brain functioned. What they seem to be going after were very specific glands in the brain, one or two of which may be involved with psychic ability, which I know sounds strange to some of your listeners, but that's what it seems to be, because usually the trepanation is done either in the front or the back of the head. If it was the result of some kind of war injury, the trepanation would be found all over the skull. So it seems to be a very specific brain surgery practice.
Very interesting part of the book was how in 1962 Dr. Bart Hughes found a relationship between the state of consciousness and the volume of blood that was in the brain. Then went on to postulate that if you could bore a hole in the head, that would change the level of blood and alter your state of consciousness.
Yeah, that actually is along the lines of of the fact that these people were very purposefully doing this as a surgical practice, not as a cultural, releasing the demons practice. This was a very specific type of surgery, and we have quite a high percentage of the individuals to whom this was performed who survived for many years afterwards, because we can see evidence of the calcium of the bone growing back to close the hole up.
How would they patch that anyhow? I think most people would assume if you drill a hole into your skull, you're dead.
Well, that's one of the amazing things, because we think that, only up until recently that successful brain surgery is possible. But because we have many individuals who clearly lived years, if not decades, decades after this was done, they survived and thrived. And in the archaeological record, what is found is some examples of these individuals. Once they died, there would be a very thin sheet of either silver or gold over top of where the operation had been performed. And what's interesting about these two metals is that gold, of course, does not react with the body in any way, shape, or form. And silver is a natural antibiotic. So whether these people knew that these principles or not, we're not sure, but that's the basic way that the Band-Aid was made, more or less, out of either silver or gold.
People are just realizing now that silver colloid is an incredible antiseptic. This is very advanced for the time.
Well, exactly.
Do you believe in what Dr. Bart Hughes had to say?
That's really not an area of my expertise. I think it's intriguing, and I think it does tie in with with the idea that this was very purposeful surgery that was performed to alter the way that the brain functioned. And in that case, or that would mean altering the consciousness of the brain. And the theory that I'm developing is the fact that the reason why they wanted to alter the functioning of the brain is that the original people looked this way. They were born naturally with these large skulls. They were probably much more intelligent and possibly more psychic. And therefore, as this small original population over the generations began to breed with normal humans, these special powers and abilities began to deteriorate. And so I think the surgery was an attempt to alter the functioning of the brain to bring back these super powerful ancestors.
In 2 weeks, when they come out with this DNA evidence, what do you believe the findings will show?
I can't speculate too much at this point, but actually, if you've heard of Lloyd Pye of the Star Child Project, I've worked with him over the course of the last 2 years, and his geneticist was able to do a little bit of studying of some of the Paracas material, and what he simply said is he found segments of DNA in the main strands that did not correspond to anything in the global record of human Homo sapiens.
Scientists say that Einstein's brain had a particularly large parietal lobe, which is the part of the brain that deals with math concepts and visual computing data and whatnot. By changing the shape of the skull to this elongated shape, you would in fact increase the size of the parietal lobe. Perhaps the elongation technique is a way of changing the shape of the brain itself in order to achieve mathematical advantages.
Yeah, that could be, and also the motor center seems to be up there as well. So definitely, from what I've heard of a few physicians that I've been able to speak about this with, they said the alteration of the shape of the skull into this elongated or conehead-like way would result in the brain activity between the two hemispheres being different than what we are, or how we think and process information.
Talk to the audience about some of the tours that you're doing in Paracas and in the area.
Well, the main tours that I give are around Paracas and Nazca. That's one area. Another area is Cusco and the Sacred Valley. Another one is around Lake Titicaca, which is to the south. And a further one tends to include Tiwanaku and the very mysterious sites in Bolivia. And so this June, Dr. Rita Louise, who I've had a lot of conversations and been interviewed many times by her, she's bringing a group down in order to look at both the scientific aspects of the ancient megalithic buildings, but also the more intuitive side of it. And she's very intrigued with both the megalithic structures and also the elongated skulls and who they may have been originally. And so she's going to try to psychically tap into some of these places. We're going to open up the cases at the Paracas Museum and let her and other people actually hold the skulls and see if they receive any information from any psychic information from them. So that for me will be a first in terms of doing tours that way. But I'm very excited because I'm I tend to be very open-minded. I very much believe in psychic capability, and I would love to see what the results would be of Dr. Rita Louise's research.
Have you discovered any of these skulls to be fakes?
On the internet, there are lots of them. In life, I haven't seen any that are fake because there are literally so many of them here that nobody would waste their time trying to make an artificial one. It's just, they are literally in the hundreds in Peru.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I think they are the traces of a lost type of humanity of some kind. I think if we're able to find old enough skulls, that they won't be what we call humans. They may be what are regarded in some of the ancient legends as being, the small g gods, as in the titans of Greece. And in almost every culture, you find these stories about ancient, super ancestors, and I think these are the remnants of that. What I'm doing now is that since David and I have more or less covered cranial deformation, I'm looking more and more at trying to find examples of natural-shaped elongated skulls. And now that I'm living in Cusco, no one's really looked at this area very much from that perspective. And there is an example which has become world famous in the last 2 years, which is only an hour's drive from where I am right now. And it is a baby whose head is basically the size of its entire torso. It is not a fake because it's in a small, obscure private museum, and doctors who have looked at this baby, which consists of head, neck, and torso, and arms, is that the doctors are confounded because there are certain attributes that don't make sense to them. And those basic facts are that the skulls, in terms of their age, appear to be less than 14 months old, but the teeth appear to be at least those of a 7-year-old child. So that's just that's the beginning of what we're looking at.
So what is mainstream science view on the elongated skulls? Or do they tend not to think about it or talk about it? Klaus Donna referred to these as ooparts, out-of-place parts.
No, that's true, and it also goes along with the megalithic buildings. They label everything as being Inca, but what I've been doing is, unlike many academics, I ask, in the case of the elongated skulls, I ask doctors and nurses and dentists to look at them, because it's not the sole domain of someone like an archaeologist. You have to bring in other disciplines. And in the case of the megalithic buildings, you bring in engineers, architects, geologists to look at it. So the open-minded doctors are completely perplexed, and they're helping me work on this, as well as the nurses, and they've given me many very good pointers, and that's how I've been able to access this major laboratory in the United States, is that they're very curious to find out whether or not these are completely human or not, and they're more or less volunteering their time, because studying ancient DNA is incredibly expensive. It's not the sort of thing where you take a blood sample from someone and test their DNA. If something is 2,000 years old, it is so badly degraded that it becomes an incredibly expensive process.
I'm curious about that. So how much would it cost to do a study on one skull, say?
Well, I've been given an approximate figure of about $100,000. But luckily, we're getting samples tested from 9 different individuals, plus one normal human that we know is normal and exactly how old it is as a, as something to compare against. And we're getting all of that work done for about $7,000.
What do you believe it would take for science, for mainstream anthropologists, to change their view? If, for example, all 70 of these tests came out in your favor, would that change things?
I'm not really overly concerned with trying to convince academia. I just, if we find something interesting, then I think that information belongs to all 7 billion people on this planet. Mm-hmm. The thing is that the...
Can you backcharge them?
Yeah. Well, the thing is that all of the data that we receive from this will be peer-reviewed in papers by these PhDs. So that's one facet of it, but the other facet is that all of this ancient knowledge belongs to all of us. And so, I'm not overly concerned with what universities have to say, or if they want to battle me about it, they can go ahead because, bring it on. But this information belongs to everybody, and that's part of my mission.
You seem to have disrespect, if I may, for the mainstream. Is that fair to say?
I wouldn't say that. It's just that I was in the university system, and I saw how people can get pigeonholed and restricted by superiors. And so that's why I like to be an independent researcher working with independent, open-minded researchers. We do have to find scientific evidence for what we're looking at. That's why I don't like to speculate very much. I always wait for the actual data to come out. But I wouldn't say it's just that many great researchers I know of, such as Graham Hancock, have been ridiculed and attacked for just asking questions about so-called prehistory. And the more of the researchers like Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval and many others that I work with, the more that we're pooling our information together, the more we're able to show that the history of humanity is far more interesting than what we've been led to believe. We didn't simply go from hunter-gatherers 6,000 years ago to suddenly building giant pyramids in Egypt. It's far more complicated and far more fascinating than what conventional history is still trying to tell us.
If my audience wants to actually go down to Paracas, meet you, and do the tour, how would they do that?
The easiest way is through my website, which is www.hiddenincatours.com. www.hiddenincatours.com.
And your latest book, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation, the best place to purchase the book, Brien?
Actually, the best place to buy that, the easiest, through Amazon, but you can also buy it through the publisher, which is Adventures Unlimited Press. That's David Hatcher Childress's publishing company.
I know that you're going to be writing a follow-up to this book. I hope that's okay to say to the audience.
Sure.
When can we expect the follow-up, and what are you going to be focusing on in the second book?
Well, the second book is going to be about Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador, because that's where the largest and most intriguing skulls, I think, have been found. And it will include a lot of the DNA data, so it'll take at least a year for it to be completed, because I want it to be grounded in science.
If anyone has problems finding the book, you can go to my website, www.westcoasttruth.com, and the image of the book is at the bottom of the page. Click on that. It'll take you to the Amazon link. Brien Foerster, thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Absolutely my pleasure.